Greetings, brothers and sisters. So this is Kanye's now 4-post Instagram page. He's deleted his post multiple times after talking about controlling his narrative and free speech. And this is one of the great things about Kanye that he shares with Donald Trump, that, you know, he doesn't pretend to be something he's not, right? I mean, I guess he does, like Donald Trump also does, but in a way that, like, you can totally see through it, right? Like, they're not, they don't stick to a message and stick to a brand or whatever it is. They get emotional and go off script all the time. And Kanye is the ultimate in going off script. But anyways, he deleted all of his Instagram posts, especially the ones from the Super Bowl. And he left one up last night, which luckily I took a screenshot of, because I knew it probably wasn't going to last long, and it's hilarious. Upon my wife's request, please nobody do anything physical to Skeet. I'm going to handle this situation myself. Now, you know, I've talked about in the past, if you're a person who has an audience on social media, just sending people over to somebody else's page or whatever, you know, Britney Spears did this. I had somebody do it to me. It's just not cool, right? It's not cool to sort of abuse your audience in that way. You're called an influencer, right? That's what people are called now, who have influence over other people on the internet. And, you know, to use that influence to sort of have other people, your audience, fight your battles for you and go and attack and spam people. That's why I've talked about this in the past. I don't agree with that behavior. It only, you know, it's using force, which, you know, I talk about quite often. Whenever you use force, there's a counter force. And so it's just not, I mean, it's not good behavior. And all this trolling and hatred, you send hatred towards other people. By using your platform, you know, it just isn't cool. It's not cool to abuse your audience that way and send hate over to somebody else's or whatever it is. In Kanye's case, you could have somebody going over and trying to hurt Pete Davidson or his wife or something. So, I mean, it's totally irresponsible, but it's also, you know, totally Kanye. And then Tank Sinatra, so I don't know who this is, but the person's got a check mark, so they must be famous. She's not wrong. So this is from page 6. Kim Kardashian allegedly worried someone will hurt Pete. I thought his name was Skeet because of Kanye. Kim Kardashian allegedly expressed her concerns that someone might physically harm her boyfriend, Pete Davidson, following a strange husband, Kanye West, social media attacks on the Saturday Night Live star. West 44 shared a purported text message from Kim Kardashian West in an Instagram post that's now been deleted. You are creating a dangerous and scary environment, and that someone will hurt Pete, and this will be your fault. West, who refers to Davidson as Skeet, wrote in caption, which I already just read, right? And so page 6 did it again to Kanye with this picture, right? It's only a matter of time before Kanye turns on the real culprit here. And, you know, I mean, he married a Kardashian, so there's consequences for marrying a Kardashian. It's nice to wake up and not have any Full House or Bob Saget stuff or Alec Baldwin. But we do have Van Jones here. Van Jones welcomes baby girl with friend Naomi as conscious co-parents. The Emmy Award-winning broadcaster advocated for conscious co-parenting Saturday as he announced in a statement shared with People that he welcomed a baby girl this month with his friend Naomi. After the COVID lockdown, I got clear that I wanted another kid. I discovered that my friend Naomi also wanted a baby. So we decided to join forces and become conscious co-parents. And it's a concept that I hope more people will explore and consider. God, no, right? This loveless business relationships, like, it's bad enough when love's involved, right? Parenting and raising children, especially, you know, nowadays. But just because you want a child doesn't mean, the child needs and wants you, right? I mean, it's something where, well, let's read the rest of it. This month, we welcome to Earth a baby girl whom we will raise as co-parenting parents. This is a special time for our families. I feel grateful, joyful, and blessed as we create a safe and loving environment for this blessed young soul. I respectfully ask for your privacy. Thank you for all the love and support, Jones added. You sacrificed your privacy when you said that you wanted other people to explore this idea of conscious co-parenting. So this is Naomi Zakakona. Let's see if there's pictures. I don't know what she does. I think I have it on another page. But as soon as he left that post, he immediately exposed her to whatever kind of scrutiny. Because, there's going to be websites that are going to find out who this is. And she works for the LA County Prison. And she has made her Instagram page private. She's a hope dealer. She deals in hope. She sells hopium to people. Is she Q? This might be Q here. Jail and prison oversight practitioner, death penalty mitigation specialist. So she works, I guess. This might be Kim Kardashian. I think she does the same thing. She does the same thing. But anyways, this idea of conscientious co-parenting, right? There was a movie where two couples decided they both wanted a baby, but they thought about all the liabilities and wanted to share it with another couple, right? So they, there was 4 people co-parenting a child. And, I mean, it's not about you, right? It's about what kind of environment you can provide for a child. And if you go about the idea of bringing in souls, making a place for souls to come in and raising them up in a spiritual way and, finding the right environment for them, especially higher developed souls. And even with that, because, I experienced it, things can go south, right? It's always difficult to. I mean, there's all these unpredictable and uncontrollable circumstances when raising a child. And that's in, a natural, loving couple. Let me get to the Russia stuff and Joe Biden stuff. I'll come back to this at the end of the video. So I want to get to the Ukraine thing and the World War III in a second. So here from Fox News, why is Biden using a fake White House set?
The president has been using a fake White House set for some of his speeches.
So here's the fake White House set. And, you can see the windows. And so...
It allows him to read a script directly from a face-on monitor and without teleprompter glass that can be seen on camera.
So, Joe Biden has, this is the ultimate in stagecraft. They're trying to cover up for his mental incompetence here. And so this morning, Russia says some troops are turning to bases from near Ukraine amid invasion fears. World leaders scramble to avoid war in Ukraine amid confusion over a bid to join NATO. This was from 2 days ago. This is from yesterday. Russia pulls some troops back from Ukraine border, slams invasion reports. And so what we see here is they were talking about a false flag with, this was the Biden administration talking about the Russia was going to do a false flag. Remember? And, that's America's playbook as well. Now, Putin said this stuff that if you have the Ukraine in NATO, that there'll inevitably be some sort of conflict between Russia and the Ukraine, some military conflict. And if that happens and they're in NATO, then you're immediately at war with Russia. He said that in Europe, and he talked about, and we don't have the kind of military capabilities as NATO has, and so it would ultimately end up with some sort of nuclear war. And, that's like an inevitability, I think, at this point. I've talked about this with the predictions, the prophecies in the heartfulness system, and, other I mean, it's just something that World War III is there, right? It just hasn't happened yet, but there's going to be a World War III at some point. And America is pushing for it, provoking it much more than anybody else, because the Ukraine, most of us don't care about the Ukraine, don't really know much about it, and we don't want a war. But our leaders do, right? We don't want another war after the debacle. I mean, you just failed in Afghanistan, and you want to start another war with, this time a superpower in Russia. And it's a war that's, all the way across the world. So this is, trillions of dollars just to mobilize our forces. It's just these wars are very expensive halfway around the world. And America is just pushing for this and has been for a while. I've talked about this since the Obama days. And Hillary Clinton was, campaigning on like war with Russia, right? They really want it. They've reignited the whatever it was, the Cold War. And the Cold War was both Russia and America using each other for military buildup, right? Military, especially with nuclear weapons. But they want it. America wants it. And Russia is like, all right, they heard all this stuff, so they're pulling their troops back, so they can't, America can't do some kind of false flag thing themselves and provoke this thing, right? And the Ukrainians keep on saying, everyone calm down, because it's their country, and they know what's going to happen to their country, right? And America's just using them. And so, this is what evil empires do when they're collapsing. And, whatever reason they want World War III, it isn't good for the rest of us, right? At least, and, there's a spiritual aspect of this where there'll be hopefully an awakening by humanity to do better, to rise up to a higher level than we are now. And that's, what's predicted or talked about in the heartfulness system. And so I want to go back to this thing with Van Jones and conscious parenting. The modern world isn't good on families. In fact, the system itself has been trying to undermine the family, and not just the married couple, the mom and the dad, but the extended family. We're a divisive country, and it used to be that you had to deal with your in-laws, you had to deal with your neighbors, you had to deal with the village. And so people just had to be better. Like they had to be, socially better, because everyone had to work it out because they needed each other, right? In a tribal situation, in a village-based, agrarian, a village-based situation, you needed your neighbors, you needed your family, and you couldn't survive without them. I mean, life is very hard, in terms of growing your food and doing all the things you had to do before there was Walmart, before there were stores, before there was manufacturing, before there was the ability to travel, the air travel and car travel, right? So the motivation was there not to be a dick, right? The motivation was there to work on your social skills because you were dependent on other people. Your survival was dependent on a strong social connection and having each other's back and all these things. But the modern world has erased that because we don't need our neighbors and, other people for the most part. People are lonely. Of course, we do need, whatever, right? But you can even have single parents, and the system helps support that. There's daycare, there's, the school where you can have your kids go to school, that's a form of daycare as well. And there's ways now that even as a couple, both parents are working and the kids are, just neglected in a sense. And now with the internet, you have households of people who are all on different devices and screens, not even watching the same TV show. When you're watching TV, your brain goes from the active beta waves to the passive alpha waves. So you could have people sitting next to each other watching TV and completely oblivious to the people around them. And if you get sucked into a show or a movie, now video games in your phone, people just disappear, right? You just see their consciousness is gone. You'll be talking to somebody and they'll look at their phone and they're just in their phone. They're not with you anymore. I mean, I saw this problem. I was at like a Jiffy Lube like 10 or 15 years ago when cell phones were just starting to text, right? Kids were just starting to text. And young people pick up on stuff and adapt to it much quicker than older people. And these young people were sitting there in Jiffy Lube, and they looked like they were the same age, but they were all texting. And I was thinking, are they together? Like, they're not even, you couldn't tell that they were together, but then the car was ready, whatever person was getting their car done, and they all got up. And I'm like, they're not even, they're sitting within close proximity, but they're not even connected in any way, right? They're all in their phones. And now with social media, people can make connections with people over long distances and have a social life that's, they're in their own house having a social life on a global situation, which is positive in one way, because you can find other people that believe and are like you. Maybe you won't find anybody like that in your local proximity. But the problem with that is you no longer have to deal with or depend on people in a local situation. You depend on businesses, right? You depend on grocery stores and restaurants and, wherever it is, people to do their jobs, but they're not relationships. People don't have relationships with their neighbors, and even in terms of their significant others, sometimes people don't even talk to their spouses and their kids, and it's kind of a disaster, right? And so that's bad enough as it is. The family has taken a beating. The system has, destroyed the family in various ways. And parents are spending less and less time with their kids. And when they do, devices are often used, so it's not even real quality time. And that's just the beginning of problems with modern life. But before that, America had a 50% divorce rate. I mean, even before internet and cell phones were, activated. And so it wasn't going great either. And, relationships with family started to disintegrate, and people realized that they didn't like spending time with their families, and their families sucked. And, without the dependence on your family, there was no reason to try to work it out, right? You didn't have to work it out. And that came with relationships as well. And raising kids is difficult now because of all of these, above factors. And with the world being the way it is, it's easy for people to say, I don't want to bring a kid into this world, right? I don't want to bring a kid into the apocalypse. But, there's another way of looking at it. Master Chargy gave a couple of great talks. One was that he talked about, and I've read this in the past, that a child who is, raised with a loving mother, particularly in a loving environment, can become anything in this world, because love is such an important factor all the way up to throughout your whole life. But in terms of the child, to be around their mom until they're the age of like 7 or 8, right? And that's when their brain changes. There's a pruning of your synapses, and there's rapid brain development that happens at 7 and 8, where, sort of a younger kid, a toddler, a kid, a preschooler goes to being a kid, right? There's these changes, these transformational changes, one that happens when they're 7 and 8, and one that happens when you become a teenager, and then you become, a fortified adult in your 20s, where you stop growing physically. And then there's, these different stages in your life. Then another talk that Master Chargy gave was in this book called Fruit of the Tree, and it wasn't specific dogma. He wasn't saying everybody has to do this, but he was making a, counter argument to this idea of having kids and not using birth control and letting nature run its course. And one of the things he said was that, higher developed souls higher developed people, like who are spiritually developed, often don't have children. And you see this with more wealthy people, more successful people. They don't have as many kids because they're enjoying their lives, and kids are interfering with their enjoyment of their lives, and they have their own goals outside of their families. And so they don't have kids, right? Especially spiritual people, though. You think about how, like in most religions, the people who are the clergy, it's like, celibacy is practiced in many religions, and the clergy don't marry, don't have kids. Spiritual people, saintly people, they don't have kids. And he said that there are higher developed souls that will only come into Earth if they have the right environment, right? They can't come in some impoverished, where they don't have proper brain development because of malnutrition. You got to understand, the majority of people, like, they're just not living like good, normal human beings. They don't get the proper nutrition. They don't have the proper anything, right? The social system and education and they become underdeveloped humans. Their brains don't develop. And you see these people in countries around the world. I mean, you can see them in America, but it's more prevalent in these countries where people are just living in this soul-crushing poverty. And you have all these people that are living short lives, and they don't develop physically properly, and they don't get educated, and they're not they don't have much of a chance. And so higher developed souls aren't going to incarnate in that kind of a situation. They need to have proper brain development. They need they need love. They need to be loved as kids. They need all these things so that they can become what they need to become spiritually. And it's a very rare occurrence where there's families who can do that, because there's rich people who can give their children the proper amount of physical whatever their physical needs. They can meet their physical needs of food and things like that, but there's no love. The parents have they're not heart developed people. They're selfish people who are about their own materialistic lives. And they're just having kids because, that's, I want to have a kid. I want to have a kid. They have kids, right? So, but they're not really committed to the children. And they're like children themselves, even though they have the financial resources to raise their children. So you have poverty, and then you have wealth, but you have spiritual depravity, the lack of spirituality, and people connected to God. And people who are adults that realize that when they have kids, their lives aren't going to be about as much about themselves anymore. Much of your life changes when you have kids, and it has to be about your kids, right? I mean, you see this even in nature with animals that will fight to the death. A mother bear, or a mother leopard or something, right? These wolves or whatever it is, to protect their children. And so what Master Charji said was that it's kind of selfish if you're a spiritual person, and you can provide a spiritual environment for children, then these higher developed souls need a place to incarnate. And what if you were going to give birth to the next Jesus or Krishna or Buddha or something like this, right? Like, what if your child was going to be that? What if the soul that coming into your environment, like, what about these souls that could actually change this world? Higher developed souls that could come in and elevate humanity, right? It just takes one higher developed soul, never mind like a whole. And we have a situation now where all these divine beings are wanting to incarnate on planet Earth, and a lot of it has to do with the transmission, the heartfulness system. There are higher developed souls that come into these group meditations and things, right, and want to receive the transmission. Like Master Charji was saying, I see all these souls that are like, basically, I mean, they're not there physically, but he said they're like up in the ceiling type of situation. And when their transmission flows through the preceptor or master or the sitting, who's giving the sitting, this divine energy, they're absorbing it. And so there are souls that want to come and incarnate on planet Earth specifically during this time period. And so you could have influx, I don't know if that's the right word, an influx of higher developed saintly souls that come in and, just raise the whole spiritual condition of the world. This is what they talk about, indigo children or crystal children. Those are New Age terms. But this is happening. There are higher developed souls that have been here before or from other places that are coming into Earth right now to help elevate the spiritual condition of this planet, right? Bring it to a higher level of vibration and raise humanity out of its violent and, animalistic tendencies. And slave consciousness, victim consciousness, right? So for me, I was, I started the heartfulness system, and I was, just entering into my 30s. I was 29. And then I started working in the human service field. And I just had this, some inner compulsion to try to make the world a better place. And that was talked about in the heartfulness system, that at the very least, you should leave the world a better place than you found it, right? And so, I was doing heartfulness, which is a part of that, because the energy and the transmission, the clean in heartfulness benefits other people. When you're doing the practice, it benefits your people in your family. It benefits, you're receiving the transmission, and it is, flowing through you to other people. So that's one way. And I was thinking about, having kids and these things. I mean, I was entering into that stage of my life. I had been an uncle. I had 3 older sisters and an older brother and nieces and nephews and things. And so it was something where I was entering that part of my life, and heartfulness is a system where people, are married. Like most of the people that do it are married, and there's the marriage culture, and in the Indian culture, marriage is obviously a big thing, as it is worldwide. But I was working in this treatment center, and there was this kid, and I've talked about this before. He was a nightmare. He was just a kid who was sexually abused by his mom, and like his life was just a mess. He had this visiting resource who had a kid about his age, and he would go over her house, and he was like an angel. He was like really well behaved, and he was just a nightmare in the treatment center. He'd been there for 2 or 3 years, and his mom was like, she was, very, she had a foreign accent, and you would have to monitor their phone calls. And I had to sit through one of their phone calls, and it was one of the worst experiences in this, really crappy work environment of a treatment center that's like a prison for kids, but it's like psychological as well. So it's even kind of worse in a way, very restrictive, right? And these kids act up, and there are riots, kind of things, all these things, right? And so the kids just go off and act out physically and things like this, and they kind of lose it. And he would talk to his mom, and she would just say his name, like, I won't say his name, but let's say his name was Tom. And she would be like, Tom. It's like she did that for 15 minutes, just saying his name over and over again, longer than that, like crying, weeping, oh, Tom, like that, just, and she had abused him. And it was just, I mean, it was brutal. Like, just, I can't even describe how bad it was. And I was like, I talked to some of my coworkers, I'm like, is that what she does every time? They're like, oh, yeah. I'm like, oh, my God, why? And he would just get depressed and act out after they talked or whatever. But he had this visiting resource who was a woman who, wanted to help out. She was a Catholic woman. This was a Catholic, organization. It was, whatever. It was connected to some Catholic hospitals and things. And this woman wanted to volunteer, and she had a family, and she was wealthy and lived in some cul-de-sac. And she'd bring this kid over her house, and she had a kid who was, about his age, and they were trained in what to do, but she just thought she knew better, and she let the kid play with other kids. Now, this is a kid who had offended other kids in the past, and she let him out, on the loose, and he was just running around the streets. And, when they were in the treatment center, they had to be within earshot and eyesight every moment because they were at risk of offending other kids and acting out in inappropriate ways. And so when that was found out, she was cut off, right? Like she couldn't visit with him anymore because she was not following the rules. And he just spiraled even worse. He was already just miserable. And there was a time he was in the timeout room, and he was just, angry and frustrated. And, I've talked about doing the universal heartfulness prayer, where there would be times I was in the timeout room with a kid, and the kid would be settling, I'd be sitting there, and the kid would be sitting, in the corner. There was these rooms. They were, rooms with no windows with carpet, and the kids had to go there for timeout, right? And there was no door, but it was just, it's not a good place, right? And I'd be sitting there, and, I'd be doing the 9 o'clock universal prayer, praying that everyone come to find God and become a spiritual person, right? And so there's a 9 o'clock universal prayer that we do, in the heartfulness system. And Daji has recently updated it, and I can't remember what it used to be. It took me a while to memorize the new one. And it goes, I pray all my brothers and sisters throughout the world will develop intense love and devotion, and real faith will grow stronger in them, and all kinds of distractions that are facing our country and globe will go away. May this entire earth be filled with peace, with love, and with God's grace. And it used to be a shorter prayer, but it becomes more of a feeling, and there's this idea that everyone is developing the potential for spirituality as coming towards God. It's one of the things I really like to do in the heartfulness system. And so I was able to do this prayer with my eyes open, like I've learned over the years to kind of do these things. And I would see these kids' auras, like there would be an aura. The kid would be sitting like, on the floor, and I look, and there was just like a field of light around the kid, right? Which I didn't see when it would only be during the prayer time. And, and when I do the prayer, the kid would just settle. Like it was, I mean, it was phenomenal. The kid would just, they could be angry and they could be standing there punching the wall, right, and screaming and just like they used to talk about trying to get their anger out, right, or whatever it was. I mean, many of them were on psychological drugs and, they were just emotionally and behaviorally, just a wreck. And the kid would just settle. And this kid just settled and he started to cry. And I never saw this kid cry before. Like he was always just angry and, he started to cry. And so I asked him, like, what did he want? Like, what do you want from life? And he paused and he said, I just want a family that loves me. And I just, it was a profound moment. Like I just realized that all these kids, I mean, their families were nightmares. Like they just, there was this time where there was 2 supervisors at each end of the week in the cottage, in the unit where the kids lived, right? And, you tried to create some sort of, it wasn't a family, but some sort of natural circumstances where it was, more like natural, normal lives that the kids would leave. Obviously, they're in a treatment center, and it's like a lockdown facility, but it's not, you try to make it, more of a normal environment. And there was this fiery guy that worked with the little kids in a different cottage, and he was given the supervisor position. And when he came in, he just was like not accepted by the kids, and the kids were just acting out. And he got, into it with some of the kids. There was one kid who was a really tough kid, and they had this sort of, like some sort of a adversarial relationship. It just destabilized everything in the unit, right? And it was like chaos. So this guy said, they're looking at us like bad guys, and they really meant him more than anybody else. And he goes, let's have some sort of a like picnic, and we'll have their families come in, because they were trying to get their families back involved. And so we went to this nice park, and a park I would later go with my kids, and I had gone years earlier. It was near one of my sister's houses. And so I'd been to this park before, and it was kind of a cool park, and they had like paddle boats, and it was, a natural park, but there's sports fields and things. There was like a cool river, just a nice natural environment. And we went out there, and it was hell, because the parents were nightmares, right? Like many of the parents I'd never seen before. And they were like, I mean, it was just bad. You could see, the idea that what a picnic meant to these people, right? It was completely different than it would meant to the people, the staff that was there. It was brutal, right? So it's just you really can't imagine the environments that these kids are living in, and it's lots of them. They're growing up in this criminal, just parents that are in and out of jail, and kids are being abused in all kinds of ways. Kids are getting taken away, put into the system, which isn't great either. And, I mean, so these kids don't have loving families. So this kid said this thing about, I just need I just want a family that loves me. And I thought about my experience of working there, and I was like, you really can't help these kids, because you're not going to be their parents, right? They're going to have adults come in and out of their lives, and some of the adults will be well-meaning, but the adults are overwhelmed because the system is saturated by all these kids being put into foster care and treatment centers. And, no one can give them the proper care, and you don't love them, right? I mean, these kids are miserable, and they're, horrible, and, it's a job and you're getting paid. So, I mean, it isn't like there's love there. It isn't like you're their parent and you can love them and you have control over their environments. And they're just going to go through all these series of different adults in their lives who have their own, whatever parental issues and things. And the kids are just never going to get better, because what they need is a good, loving family. And so that was echoed by these talks and teachings by Master Charji. And so I was, thinking about this, like if I was going to make the world a better place, which I wanted to do, then it would be to raise kids in a loving environment, have those kids be better than me, right? So the next generation, my children, would be, more spiritual, and they wouldn't have the baggage that, I had from growing up with my parents, right? My, dysfunctional, incompetent parents. Like it would be the next generation would be better. And if everybody did that, like if each family, each set of parents and each family raised their kids in a way that those kids would be better than, would have a better, more normal, natural, less dysfunctional family than they grew up, like that would be the way to rectify the situation we have, right? where kids would become better after each succeeding generation. And, this is what I was hoping for. And then, my ex had similar, I mean, she read the same things I did, and she had, her positive side, her spiritual side, aspired for the same sort of family, but, we weren't able to create it, right? There was, insanity. I mean, when somebody has really severe emotional trauma and things from, whatever spiritual things that were going on there. I mean, we, attempted to live on a homestead. My kids learned to milk cows, and, they got some things. They were homeschooled, and, there were ways they got things that, that were good and positive and certainly better than, what most kids around the world grow up with. But I think about it as, a personal failure, right? Not, I mean, it doesn't plague me. I understand all the factors that were involved. Of course, my daughter Anna committed suicide last year. I mean, that was and it wasn't just that. It was all the things leading up to it and the way the divorce took place and all the things that have happened with all that, right? And I look at my own life, and I didn't get it together until I started Heartfulness when I was in my late 20s, I was 28, 29, and then, into my 30s. So, I was a low-functioning person before that. So, my kids are still young. They're in their, 20s now, early 20s. My son, the youngest, is 19. So it's early to tell what they'll become in this world, but I don't think right now they're not actively pursuing heartfulness or a spiritual life and things like this. So, it's not what I hope for. They're not really into the idea of an intergenerational family farm, and they have different views about science and things, and, they have to go through their own whatever it is, right? But what I'm saying here, even with the right intentions, even with, this idea of, I mean, it was ideas of inviting souls, higher developed souls, into, a family environment and providing access to information and spiritual energy and the transmission and these gatherings. I mean, my kids went to all these gatherings, and, all of them started the Heartfulness system. They were, given these sittings and transmission, which is, a blessing. Like, I think it's the best thing that can happen to a person. I think a life, my life lived without receiving the introductory sittings, the initial introductory sittings of the Heartfulness system would be a failure, would be a tragic life if I hadn't had that experience, introduced in the Heartfulness system, and then all the sittings and, transmission I've received since then. I think it's a blessing that I can't even describe in words, right? So my kids got that, and they attended these gatherings, and they interacted with people, and, they're all smart, and they have their abilities, but, it didn't go the way I'd hoped, right? And that, always is a little bit of a bummer for me. But going into it with this idea of a service to God and, service to, your children and humanity and all these things, and this idea of making the world a better place and, all the things that I talked about, and, higher developed souls, making a landing spot for higher developed souls to come in and, participate in the evolution of the species and the redemption of planet Earth is a wonderful and noble concept. And so you have these new age conscious scientific, people who don't really believe in God, and they can't get it together enough to sustain a romantic relationship, right? They can't be in a healthy functioning marriage because of whatever reason, their own, baggage and selfishness. But they want to have kids, so they get into these business-like relationships, and they have money, so there's some advantages there. But it's not, it's so far away from what's natural and what is the divine design of a family. And, and they're usually doing it for selfish reasons, right? They feel like they want to have a kid. But does the kid want you, or does the soul want the environment that you're going to provide, right? Just the term is so pretentious and, this attitude about it. And again, maybe they'll get it when they have the kid and they'll, do better in some ways. But you see with these like woke people and these liberal people that, and again, conservatives have done this for years in their own way, have indoctrinated their kids, and, the Christian religion indoctrinates children in a way, the families to something that's not true. There's stuff that's not true in the religion that isn't based in Jesus's teachings, right? Isn't based in the, the essence of what Christendom is supposed to be about. And so America indoctrinates kids, and so does, right-wing conservative people. But these woke consciousness people, all this bizarre, stuff that they're pushing on all of us, they're pushing on their kids. And their kids are getting it through social media because, social media is run by all these people as well. And so these kids are getting a big dose of how to do, being a human the wrong way, right? And it's all like messed up and twisted and, pretentious and unnatural and against God's will and all these things, against the natural order of things. And they're just pushing it on their kids in ways that these kids are going to be so screwed up because they're not going to have a loving family. And the parents, are so locked into their beliefs and ideology. And this is not like, they're the only ones, because it's been a problem forever. That's why the hippie movement started in the first place, because they didn't like the forced indoctrination they were getting from their families and the conservative families. So you had this liberal awakening, which, came from the divine process. I mean, this came from, Babaji, the second master of the heartfulness system, transmitted to all this youthful, people, the hippies, the boomers, and, had them wake up to what was, all the negatives of what was going on in the culture at the time. But they've taken it in an, unhealthy and unnatural direction, right? And they're indoctrinating these kids to it, based in beliefs instead of, you have to let your kids have their own life, right? Your kids have to figure out things, in ways that most of us, all had to do as well, right? We all, didn't take what our parents wanted us. Our parents wanted whatever they wanted for us, and we went in a different direction, most of us, right? Or, whatever it was, right? We didn't follow in our parents' footsteps. I mean, if you had good parents, maybe, yeah, but most people don't. So, the family has been devastated. I mean, that's the bottom line. And it has to be reclaimed. And, I mean, I don't think it'll happen unless there's a breakdown in our civilization. That's the need for a collapse of our material, technological worlds that divide the family, all of our technology, all of our orientation to the world, and divide us from some sort of a natural village-based situation, an extended family. I don't see a way to recreate. This is the central aspect, because how you're socialized as a baby and as a toddler and as a young kid, and again, not having functional grandparents, not having your parents have a functional marriage, not having time with your parents, everyone being on screens, not having, shared work where you go out and you do work and you accomplish things together as a family, right? All these things that you get on a homestead and a farm. I mean, even my kids and I, my wife, my kids and I go out and we're putting in a fence, and, it's a good experience, and you've accomplished something together as a group, all these things that have been lost by modern life. Like parents and kids don't work together to accomplish something and build something and make something and, do things together. And so all these things are being lost by, our modern situation. And until they're reclaimed in some way, and again, there doesn't appear to be a way unless the system collapses. And that's just, a tragedy, because we could have all the advantages and all the free time that we have. The great thing about our civilization right now is our free time. But most people misuse their free time to do dumb shit, right? To engage in stuff that takes them in the wrong direction. Self-indulgent stuff instead of bettering themselves and using that time to connect to God and, be a better person and evolve spiritually. I'm not saying be nicer or be kinder. I'm saying, move in a direction, like those things are part of it, but move in a direction where you're evolving spiritually and your soul is moving closer to God, and you're, becoming more, a better version of yourself. Your soul is more and more emanating through you, and your lower egotistical tendencies are disappearing. And that simply just isn't happening, right? And so conscious parenting. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.